Scott Frost had a press conference today via Zoom. He was sitting in his office, and all the media were at their station, their home, wherever they may be, firing questions at the head coach. First one out of the gate for us tonight. The head coach was asked about, was there advantage to being ready to go on June 1st?
I think it is going to be a help to us to be back earlier. And we owe a thanks to a lot of people. I kind of mentioned some of our operations people and some of the coaches that have been essential personnel and been here the whole time to make sure that we are ready to get our kids back, maybe ahead of some other people. Also got to thank, everyone from Ted Carter to Ronnie Green to Bill Moose, even the governor and the mayor. We've been careful to follow every state health guideline, every city health guideline. But a lot of those people have been very open to us pushing the envelope a little bit on allowing our kids to come back into a safe environment. So I'm grateful to those people. What's been interesting about this virus and everything that we've gone through with it is I think there's inherent advantages and disadvantages that have happened all through this. Getting your kids back to campus certainly could be an advantage. But there's schools that have had all 15 spring practices and we got 2. And there's schools in our league that have had a dozen or more and we've had 2. Certainly the recruiting advantage and disadvantage probably isn't tilted in our favor. We have to get kids to Lincoln, Nebraska to see it because we're recruiting kids from farther away than a lot of other people. And without the ability to get kids to Lincoln, it's made recruiting more of a challenge for us than maybe some people that are in areas with more recruits. So there's been advantages and disadvantages that were probably unintentional all through this thing. And right when it started, I think we did a good job getting ahead and putting our heads together and trying to figure out how to solve the problem of getting our team back to campus safely for them and safely for the community. And I think we're a little bit ahead of curve on that. But any advantage we get there, we need, because I don't think we've been on the right side of a couple other ones.
Huskers are, Josh, into their 3rd week of working out. There are some schools, a handful of them in the league, that aren't back yet and won't be back, I don't think, until next week. How big of an advantage do you think it is?
Well, that's what I was just about to say. There's some schools around the country that aren't back yet, and the Huskers are ready to go June 1. I think it is a huge advantage because, like we talked about last segment, about the Huskers missing spring ball and not getting guys in there, at least now you can get guys back together on campus and start working out. It's not as probably valuable as a spring practice would have been, but it still is valuable to have your guys in the weight room and working out and doing all the things that come with that. So to be that far ahead of the curve is big. It's huge. There's no way around it. It's a big deal.
Now, these are voluntary workouts from now until you get into about mid-July. The head coach was asked about, is everybody on your football team here now?
Very few. You can probably count them on one hand, and I really don't want to talk about who's here and who's not. This whole time, the players' safety has been our first priority. Our community and state's safety is just as big a priority. And one thing we've been careful to do is not make it mandatory for anybody to do anything. So there's been different phases of this and different times throughout where certain families have thought their son was probably going to be safer being in Lincoln. Some other families that felt safer with having their son at home. And we've never tried to discourage them from staying home if they want to. We're to a point where there's probably, you can count on one or two hands the number of total players that aren't here.
So not all, but most of them from the football team are there. Now, we've talked a lot in the last 2 weeks about the 6-week plan that the football committees have put out and now have approved, that these teams can start really having ramped up preparations beginning July 24th, about a 2.5-week period before they can then get on the practice field. But the hours you can spend with your team goes up to 20 hours a week beginning July 24th. Here's the head coach's thoughts about the 6-week ramp up.
I think one of the reasons we're looking at that plan is because early on in this, we started looking at 4, 5, and 6 week models to return to play. And I think they've kind of been stubbornly holding on to those models, even though a lot of people are getting their kids back to campus. That being said, I am in favor of it because we missed spring ball. Missing the amount of spring practice that we did just sets you back as far as knowing X's and O's and being able to operate as a team, and having a little extra time before camp starts to get walkthroughs and get some of that done will definitely, I think, benefit everybody that missed spring ball. It is going to make the scheduling of everything a little interesting for us, because usually you give players time off to recover before fall camp starts, and you definitely don't want to give players time off during that time when we have more access to them and more ability to do things. So it's going to change our scheduling model a little bit to make sure our players are here through that, but also fresh and ready to go for the long haul of the season.
In essence, it's going to be a 2-week mini camp from July 24th to August the 7th. Here, just kind of continue on. More thoughts from the coach about that 2-week period.
If this works well, I might be we'll see how it goes this fall, but might be in favor of doing something like this every year. So we'll see if anything like that plays out. The model for what it's supposed to look like, again, hasn't been finalized yet, but there's a proposal that it would be about a week and a half of 20 hours a week of access with the players. That'll include non-contact walkthroughs, which, again, from my standpoint, if we can get some work done during that time as far as the X's and O's go, we're actually going to be able to be a little easier on them in camp. You won't have as much to get installed and as much to do, so maybe you might be able to limit the reps and just basically do enough to get them ready to go out and hit, get used to wearing the pads and get some live reps. But they'll probably, with the added week and a half, you don't have to be in quite as big a hurry to get a lot of reps run and a lot of the X's and O's in. So we'll see if that passes this week. That's the direction it looks like it's going. And I think, like I said, with everybody missing some spring ball, that's some valuable time to just catch up on the X's and O's in the scheme that we missed out on the spring.
What do you make of all that, Josh?
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I think that there's the biggest thing is that it's going to be a change. It's going to be different, which we know that, and if the only thing that I think it's mostly positive, and there are a lot of good things, and I think he touched on it just a little bit at the end of one of the clips, that the only thing that might be a little bit concerning is that if you kind of do this right before fall camp anyway, that's a lot of football for a long stretch of time. Especially if you have a normal fall camp and then normal regular season and then possibly postseason after that, that's a lot of football. You don't want your guys to get burned out, but overall, I think the positives outweigh the negatives. And like he said, they don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but from what he was talking about, it sounds like it's a good idea and a good way to kind of make up for the lack of a spring ball.
I think it's a one-time deal. Personally, I think it's just because of what happened with spring practice that the NCAA is going to allow this year. Might be wrong, but I just get the feeling this will be a one-time thing. The pros, folks, you may hear us talk about OTAs a lot. A lot of times teams will have OTAs in the NFL in like June, then have about a month off, and then they get into their camp and then they go. But because college football has always been set up with spring ball, that has been the OTA for college football. My gut says this is a one-time deal just because everybody missed so much spring football practice to give them these extra week and a half to 2 weeks that they're going to get this year if the legislation passes. But as he said, I think it will. All right. We've talked a lot about the wide receiver spot in the last week, particularly after the J.D. Spielman news. The coach was asked about the wide receiver room and the running back room, which really needs to be bolstered up and should be with the addition of a couple of young freshman running backs. His thoughts about those two rooms.
We got some guys coming back that I feel good about that are healthy and looking, from what I hear, better than they have in the past. But skill on offense certainly has a possibility of being one of those positions. I think that little bit of access and time with our players prior to fall camp starting could be a benefit to us. But, Coach Lubick's going to have to earn his money. Coach Held, guys like that are going to have to try to fast track some of those guys when we are able to meet with them and work with them to try to get some of those young guys ready to be players for us.
Josh, I can hear after the post-practices coming up in August that there are going to be a lot of questions about those two spots after really every practice probably.
Oh, 100%, especially like Coach just mentioned, Coach Lubick is new at the position, and he didn't really get a spring ball at all, so he's even more under the gun at that position. But to go along with that, obviously a lot of new names headlined by Omar Manning. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done there, but there's also a lot of reason for hope. A lot of talented guys that are going to be inserted into those position groups. So I think that the majority of the questions, especially early on in fall camp, are going to be about those two positions. You're dead on with that.
Yeah. Well, you don't get through a whole press conference without some chat about the quarterback position, and Coach Frost got a question about the quarterback position, but it wasn't about Adrian Martinez, but it was about Luke McCaffrey. Here's his answer.
I don't have any worries or concerns about Luke, to be honest with you. He's one of the hardest working kids on our team. He spends all his time on football. He's going to be ready. All the reports I'm getting is that he's whipping it around really good and throwing better than anybody's ever seen him throw. So I feel real confident about him. Obviously, with Logan being new and enrolling early, missing those spring practices wasn't ideal for him either. But we'll get him caught up. You know, we were sad to see Noah Vedral leave, but I feel great about those three kids and some of the ones behind them. And that is going to allow us the opportunity to focus the repetitions in fall camp on the three guys and Matt Masker and others as well. So I think they'll get plenty of reps in fall, and we'll get Logan caught up.
My one image of Luke McCaffrey, Josh, was the Indiana game where Noah Vedral started. Adrian was hurt, and there was a play in the game where Noah's helmet came off, so you got to come out for a play. And by the time I was describing that Vedral's helmet was off, McCaffrey was already in the huddle. He was already grabbing the guys and starting to go. He shot out there like a cannon to get ready on the field.
Yeah, he's everything that you talk about the words competitive and a gamer and all of those things. He's definitely all of those things, which is what you want. You want somebody who, if Adrian Martinez is the starter going into fall camp, you want somebody who's going to just push him and push him and push him, which, as Coach said, Noah Vedral is gone now, so he's not one of those guys that's going to push him at that position, and so you want Luke to make it a competition, and that's a lot of times that's coach speak, but I think that most Nebraska fans who saw Luke McCaffrey play last year know that he's talented enough to start at quarterback for Nebraska, and the coaching staff has said multiple times that they think that he is a quarterback. They're not going to move him out to a wide receiver position or use him in different places. He's a quarterback, and so I think that you hope that it is a really, really good competition throughout fall camp, and that both guys can stay healthy throughout the season as well.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, we're going to need to take a break. When we come back, the coach also got into some of the social unrest that we're dealing with, not only as a community, a state, and a country. How does he handle that with his football team? We'll get some thoughts from him coming up next. One of the topics that you knew would come up and should have come up was all the unrest we're having in this country and the Black Lives Matter movement after the horrific death up in Minneapolis. And some programs try to muzzle their players. That's not the case at Nebraska. Here's the coach talking about how he wants his players to be able to speak out.
We've always, I think, been on the right side of this and letting our players have their own voice. And all I want to do is try to educate our guys to use their voice in the right way. And that doesn't mean telling them what to say. That just means to help them understand that, social media is a valuable thing because it can spread information, but can also be dangerous. I just want our kids to understand that how they portray themselves on that is kind of, we call it their resume to the world, and to be smart about what they're putting on those things. But we've never tried to stifle our kids' voices. I want them to have the outlet to voice their opinions and say what they think, and we'll always encourage that kind of free thinking and free speech in our program.
Josh, it seems like kind of the adult way to handle this thing, and yet, as I said, some programs haven't allowed that. Iowa is one that has not allowed their kids to get on social media. They may be changing that policy with all the problems they've been dealing with, but I like the approach that the head coach has with his team.
Yeah, I definitely think it's the right way to go about it. You don't want to muzzle them, like you said. And there's obviously some kind of a line with certain things where you like Coach said, you know that you want your guys to be representing the team because they are playing for your team. They are representing your university, so you want them to do that in a good way. But there's also the point that they obviously have thoughts. They are their own person, and you don't want to just stifle them and keep them from sharing those thoughts. And in today's day and age that we live in with social media, obviously there are a lot of bad things that go with that, but it's also a way for every single person to get on and represent who they are to the world. And it's like he said, it's the resume to the world. And they do have a platform. There's, with the name, image, and likeness that we've all been talking about over the last several years, and especially the last few months, they're important. These players have a platform, and they're able to speak to all the different people that follow them, and they can share their opinion on things. And like, if they do it in the correct way, which is, with a respectful and an adult way, then I think that it's great. It's awesome.
All right, here's our last clip from the 25-minute press gathering today, and was the head coach talking about what he thinks has been learned over the last couple of weeks for his players, for everybody in the country as we deal with this as a society.
I think it's given us all an opportunity to examine some of the things that we thought we knew but might be naive to. Anytime something like this happens and there's strong feelings throughout the country and something despicable like that happens, I think it gives everybody a time to reflect. My biggest priority is to make sure that our players are all treated equally, that our players all feel safe in this building, that we're a team that treats everybody the same regardless of where they come from or what they look like. And it has made me feel good about the environment we have here, talking to some of our players. I said this maybe one other time, but I think sometimes football players can be shielded from some of the issues that other people have because within these walls, it's real easy to just be teammates. And I am proud of the fact that talking to a lot of our guys that none of our players feel discriminated against or feel like those issues exist in the building. I shouldn't say none. The ones I've talked to have all given me really positive answers on that. But again, they say there's no atheists in foxholes. I think it's hard to have some of those issues on a football team because a football team gives you an environment for people of all different races and backgrounds to come together and learn about each other and see the good in one another and work together. And so football teams honestly are a kind of an example of that I think a lot of other people could follow. And we need to be an example because of our influence here at Nebraska football, and we'll try to be. But the best way that I know how to do that is to continue to try to provide an environment within these walls where everybody feels safe and equal.
Very good comments from the head coach, and a good way for us to leave off our coverage of what was happening earlier today when the head coach talked to the media. First really press conference he's had since March, right before spring practice began and before the whole shutdown from COVID-19. Thoughts? 866-HUSKER-1, 866-487-5371. We're back to wrap up the hour next.